like what you do, a lot of it. Like last year we were in Walnut Creek area, but this year's the conference, and that's like a bigger event. That's in Southern California this year in San Diego. Nice location, but yeah, if you want to give me your card, I can email you that about the Vertibrate Pest Council. You can take this.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's 11:01, so we're running a little behind. I apologize about that. Happy New Year. Thanks for being here. First meeting of the new year. So it's the annual time to remind you that memberships are annual, and so it's time to renew if you haven't already renewed, and those of you who have, thank you so much. Also, it is our new board year, so I want to thank Joan Patrick and Rebecca Mullaney, who have stepped down from the board this year to pay attention to other aspects of their busy lives. And I want to welcome Laura Campbell from Sagacio and Hunter Emch from Redwood Empire, who have joined the board. So that's exciting. Also, in our January board meeting, we hold our annual officer elections. And Rebecca Mullaney was our secretary previously. Since she stepped down, we had an open seat. And Laura volunteered to step up into that. We got her before she knew what all that was going to be about, actually. So that's great. And then Jenna Russell is continuing as our treasurer. Thank you, Jenna. John McKenna, who couldn't be here today, is continuing as vice president. And I got reelected as president. So I am continuing as president. Sonoma County Grape Day is coming February 10th. If you haven't already register. It's an awesome program. We actually have 6.5 hours of CEUs requested. Should be hearing back from DPR any moment on those. But lunch is included. We're having Lombardi's cater, box lunch. We'll have coffee, snacks. Should be awesome. Tickets are selling fast, so grab them. Something I always forget to mention when I open these meetings, and so I made a note, don't forget to mention it, but if you're new here, the bathrooms are in the back of this room, so you just go out that door there and to the left, and I always forget to mention that, but now you know. And also silence your phones. If you haven't really thought to do that yet, please silence your phones. And I don't want to hold up this meeting too long, so I'm going to jump over to introducing Breanna. And I'm going to try to read the bio off of this, which is incredibly small print. I just realized, like, and it's not like a landscape. You want to introduce yourself? All right, so I apologize for not doing a formal introduction to Breanna Martinico, but please welcome Breanna Martinico.
All right, thank you all. I am a cooperative extension advisor with the University of California, and I work kind of on the interface of agriculture and wildlife. So my formal training is in ecology and wildlife biology, but I did a lot of that work because I was at Davis. So naturally you step off campus and you're on farms. And so I've just been enthralled by how much wildlife we have in and around our farms, and I feel really grateful to be able to continue through in my career and continue learning about these systems and how we can benefit from those species, but then also how we can manage wildlife so that we can still have our production goals and our operations that are functioning without, we'll talk about the pests in a little bit, but so I've been with the cooperative extension for about 3.5 years, and yeah, my contact information, my email's here. Feel free, if I don't get a chance to talk to you after, if you have questions, feel free to contact me, and that QR code goes to my website that has contact information as well. Yeah, so we're going to talk about integrated pest management strategies for burrowing rodents, especially within vineyard systems, and then I'll focus at the end more on managing raptors and biocontrol in these systems as well. And so, how many people have rodent problems on their farms that they're dealing with? Okay, so like 99% of people. How many people have, I guess, maybe you have one or more of these, but put your hand up if it's gophers. Okay, like almost everybody. How about voles? Yeah, the voles, they can come and go, and they're a problem when they're a problem. And then how many people have ground squirrel? And then those can be, yeah, ground squirrels, oh my. Yeah, that's not a good reaction. So burrowing rodents, they do serve an important function in our ecosystems, and they, especially in farms, they can provide beneficial services. Burrowing through the ground, they can aerate the soil, which can help soil fertility and health. However, well, they provide lots of other services, especially, as you could see from this picture, burrowing rodents create wildlife habitat, and burrows and other animals that don't create burrows use. They're the basis of the food chain for a lot of our natural carnivores. And on farms, however, they can become artificially inflated because there's so much more food, water, so there's these artificial inflation of resources that can help them become, very, very abundant in these systems and problematic. Sometimes there's a lack of natural predators or that natural balance in these systems, which can also add to the problem. And so what the main concerns with having the not paying attention to and managing rodents is that they can, especially in perennial systems, burrowing rodents can, we'll talk more about specifics in the specific animals, but they can girdle trunks, they can chew roots for vines and trees, which is not beneficial. They can chew drip irrigation lines, which is, I hear that almost universally, that people have problems with that. And then the burrows can also be hazardous to machinery or to people, and they can cause like instability. And so we do want to make sure, we want to find some balance, but if you are out of that balance, we'll talk about ways that you can think about bringing it back to a balance. And one way to do that, which is the integrated pest management approach. How many people have heard of integrated pest management? It's not a new term, it's been around, but we'll kind of look at how to think about applying integrated pest management to managing burrowing rodents. A couple points about integrated pest management. The strategies and tools that are recommended are science-based and are evidence-backed. And so a lot of times people will say, oh, I put a cotton ball with eucalyptus oil and that deterred the rats from my yard. And, maybe in some situations that does work, but if there's not a lot of evidence behind that as being an effective tool, it's not something that is often, it could be something. I'm not saying that every single thing is going to be science that works is science-based, but we try to promote things that we know are efficacious, that have, that if you're going to try them, that there is some sort of like evidence behind that. The other thing about integrated pest management is that you're not just taking one approach and sticking with it. It's flexible, it's adaptive, and you're going to think about your whole toolbox and different tools and strategies and how you can combine those. And then prevention and management. So prevention and monitoring, which we'll also talk about, are at the forefront of reducing the problem in the first place. It's always going to help in the long run to have a smaller problem. You'll have, less damage and maybe easier time getting rid of it than letting it get out of control and then having to deal with it. And then the last thing about integrated pest management is that it considers the effects of the actions and how that could impact people. So people applying or doing this management and the environment. So when we think about things like chemical control, fumigation, or rodenticide use, those are always the things that we would save until, if they're applicable in a certain situation, we would save that as like our last effort, because there are more non-target and other effects that come along with those sorts of things. Any questions about integrated pest management framework? Just a review on that. Okay, so just to give this as an example, so there's a graph here, and On the left-hand side, we're looking at number of animals. So let's say these are rats or something. And then over time, like how many rats do you have on your farm over time? And so this right here is demonstrating kind of a high number of rats that are fluctuating around. Their population levels are kind of shown by this like wavy line here. So sometimes they're increasing and then decreasing, and they're kind of fluctuating right around that orange line, which that's something that we would call the carrying capacity. So a specific area in an environment or a farm or a habitat can really only support a certain number of animals, and they're going to kind of be naturally limited by that number. And so without management, you may see kind of a high number of animals. And one thing that you would think about is, if this is past your threshold, if you're seeing damage or impacts that you don't like what can you do within an IPM framework? And so you want to think about two things, and you want to think about, So you want to think about, number one, lowering the carrying capacity. So you could do that through management. But you also, between this point and this point, you have to also think about removing animals, and how that might work for different species of pests is going to be different. And so the two kind of strategies with that would be lethal removal, so it could be trapping or depends on what the animal is, and then managing that area so it's less desirable to animals, so it can support less animals. And you can do that through other actions like habitat modification, exclusion, increasing biological control, and then things like that. And so hopefully at the end, you reduce the number of animals, and it's just not as a hospitable place to those pests anymore. And so they won't be zero, but they're gonna be at some acceptable level. And so whatever these two kind of like levels are for yourself really depends on your own system. Yes?
How do you measure carrying capacity?
How do you measure carrying capacity? There's a lot of probably ecological ways. I don't know of anyone specifically measuring it in this context. It's more just thinking about how can you reduce the attractability or the attractiveness of that area, the suitability of that area. So I don't necessarily think that would be something you would be particularly measuring. It's just something that if you see a lot of animals that are pests that you don't want, you could think about how can I first remove those animals, and second, make that environment less hospitable to them, less attractive to them. Does that make sense?
Vine removal.
Yeah, just make it asphalt. Yeah, so a lot of everything's going to be very context dependent and very site specific. And your actions are going to be very limited and tailored to what you kind of have going on and what the situation is. So the first step is pest ID. You're first going to need to figure out who and what or who is causing the damage. Often you're not going to see the animals causing damage, so you're going to have to look at the type of damage that you're seeing and determine what pests you have. And then second is management. And so, like I said, prevention. So we have kind of like this part here is kind of like a lot of this is management. So the first thing, like I said, prevention is often the most effective, but sometimes not, if you have a problem, you can't go back and prevent it, but in the future you could. Monitoring, acting before the problem becomes unmanageable is going to be really helpful. And then the actions that you choose, so not only site-specific, but they're very species-specific as well, and seasonally dependent. So there's so many different factors that you have to consider. And then after you take those actions, and I'm going to be talking more about all of these steps in the next slide. So if you're still like, what am I talking about? Hopefully it'll become more clear. So after you take these actions, it's really the last step you're not done. You're not like, oh, phew, those animals are gone and I'm fine now. There's a lot more, and then it keeps going. But the next step is to evaluate, did it work? Because you're going to want to adapt your strategies. You're going to also want to think about, and it's going to depend too on the level of your business. Maybe this is just like a mental calculation or a back of the napkin kind of thing, or maybe this is like a really intense spreadsheet. But did it pay off? Like, what's the cost benefit of what actions you took, and then what outcomes you got, and is that worth it? And maybe you need to up what you did, or maybe you spent so much money and you overshot, and maybe next time you might do less. So also keeping records, and I think records are important. One, I can't even remember. I always think I'll remember what I did on like the field like last week, last month, and then I don't write it down. And so it is good to have records, even if you think you'll remember, but also for people in specific positions, if you think they're not going to be in that position forever, this could help the future people that are in your job. And like I said, it doesn't end after you evaluate. You have to then continue to prevent and monitor so that it doesn't become a problem again. And so it's what's my pest? How do I manage it? Okay, I'm doing stuff. Did that work? And it's just going to keep going on and on. Does that make sense? And pests that's why we call them pests. It's like, it's stuff that we don't want to do, we don't want to deal with. And that's the way I feel like I described that iteration is like something also you're like, oh, I have to deal with that again, but it's important. And yeah. So identification, so now kind of going through that. Identification is the first step. So why do we need to identify the pest? Management by species is very different. So they have different biology, they have different, they eat different food, they utilize different resources, they have different life cycles, population cycling or trends that are going to be very, very important into how you manage them. So on the right here, I have a timetable of like different management strategies and different times of the year for a California ground squirrel. And this is on the we'll show this a little bit more later too, but this is on the California ground squirrel best management practices website. And I have the link to that later on. But it's just showing that for example, this is adult activity and juvenile activity. So not only does it matter, what species it is, but what season is it? Is it the breeding season? Is it the mating season? Is it the rearing season? And all of these different things are going to have different efficacy at different times in that life cycle. And so that's just one example. And then this is completely irrelevant to gophers, or voles, so those are really important to know what pest you're dealing with and then how to deal with it. Also, the classification by the state and federal wildlife agencies also will determine how you can what actions are legal to take against these species. And so, let's see if this is so for these species, Bottas, pocket gopher, just pocket gophers, California voles, and California ground squirrels. These are considered pest species. And do I have that? Maybe here. Yeah, so these are considered pest species by the California Fish and Game Code. So you can, if they are found to be a pest, injuring crops or property, you can control them in any legal manner. We'll talk about some of those ways. But this is not the same. Like, for example, and actually, sorry, I'm skipping around. For example, we're going to be talking about ground squirrels, but tree squirrels are not classified as pests. So they do not apply. Anything I'm saying today about like the control methods would not apply to tree squirrels. They have completely different management guidelines. So, so it's really important that you know what you're dealing with. And how to tell if you're dealing with a ground squirrel versus a tree squirrel is that ground squirrels always run down to their burrows when they're startled, and tree squirrels will always run up to a tree. But here's a picture of a ground squirrel in a tree, and here's a picture of a tree squirrel on the ground. So that's, you know, not always reliable. Okay, let me go back. So in especially in vineyards and in other orchard systems as well, I think these are the three most things that I hear about. So we'll go through a little bit about the biology and the management for each of these. But you're not, like I said, you're not going to be seeing them. So how do you know what you're dealing with? Under each picture of the animal is a picture of its burrow. And that's going to be really diagnostic for these animals. So gophers create a crescent, a fresh gopher mound is actually crescent shaped. So it's kind of hard to see here. I'll email the PDF, or I'll have a link so you can see these slides at home later. So this is like a crescent shaped burrow, and there's kind of like a burrow plug here. They can get degraded over time and look very differently, but a fresh gopher burrow or gopher mound would be, this is very characteristic. Yes?
So you don't see any hole, just the raised ground?
Over time, if it's an old burrow, all of this light dirt would get pushed off, and it could look more like this. And sorry, this is also a little bit hard to see, but maybe it could be. Yeah, there we go. That's better.
Thank you.
I was like, I can barely see it. I don't know what you guys can see. Okay. So yeah, and it can eventually, if they're very old, it would look like just a hole. But an active gopher burrow, gophers go towards the air and they plug it. And so if you want to know, if you would want to find out like, oh, is this gopher burrow active? You could just take like a little shovel or hory and clear this area right here. And you could come back in a day or two and see if they plug it up again. And that means a gopher's living in there. If it's open, a gopher is not living in there. But it could have been not a gopher mound or hole. It could have been from a vole. So voles have much shallower burrows. And I don't really even know like how deep and like far these go. But they are traveling through tunnels in the grass, in vegetation. They hate bare ground, which we'll talk about, so you can kind of see they have these openings, and then there's these tunnels through the grass right here. And if it's a fresh vole area, like if voles are present, you can look right at the openings of the burrows, and you'll see tiny little like droppings. So they'll be really small, but present. Especially right now, it's still kind of moist out. I feel like the grass is green. You can see, that's when I've seen them like the most. But so these are only like this big. They're very, very small, a couple inches. And then because compared to the ground squirrel holes, burrows, they have a very, very extensive burrow system, which you can't really tell from above ground, but the openings are like about 4 inches or bigger, depending on how old they are. And you'll see more ground squirrels living kind of more in like a colony. And so if you see any of these, you're most likely to see the ground squirrels. But if you just find the burrows and they're just kind of like tiny through the grass, it's probably more likely to be a vole. Any questions about like the types of signs? So for pocket gophers, what's really cute about them is that they're actually called pocket gophers because they put they go forage they put the food in their pockets, and then they bring it back to like whatever their little chamber is where they're living. So yeah, but they're also kind of really ugly and weird looking. But their teeth are continuously growing, and so that's why they're always like gnawing on things, which is problematic. And then again, they're almost entirely underground. The only time I would expect you would see a gopher is like when it was plugging up, when it was pushing the dirt out of its burrow, you'll see them like kind of like popping up. And then if they're really active, you can see that during the day.
Yeah, during the day.
Yeah, you could see that during all times. But they're not going to be necessarily like scurrying around the ground. So like if you walk down a vine row or something and you see like scurrying, it's probably voles. You could also have mice. I'm not talking about mice in this situation because I haven't heard of mice being really big pests. And they're definitely there, but they're not really causing as much damage as these guys.
You didn't mention moles.
Okay. Wait, hold on. There's a mole. So moles, I don't really consider them pests in vineyard situations because moles actually eat invertebrates, they don't eat vines or roots or anything. They would be a pest in a turf situation or in a small garden where they disrupt like the seedlings that are being planted. That would be problematic. And so, I have another picture of a comparison of showing a mole compared to some other species, but their mounds are like a volcano. Yeah, and they have like these big weird paddles and no eyes almost. But their mounds they're gonna just be more like a little volcano rather than have that crescent shape. So here's some examples of gopher damage. So here on the left-hand side, that was a new vine. So a vineyard decided to plant in a row. So they had a mature vineyard and they decided to plant another row in between every single row. And they didn't do any sort of gopher control beforehand. And their vines were just decimated because those new vines are just very succulent and enticing to gophers. So that's what a lot of their vines ended up looking like, unfortunately. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you could prevent that. But right now we're just kind of looking at like what they do. And so, yes, I think this is the number one problem with gophers. And so especially young plantings are vulnerable to this. We've seen gophers coexisting in older vineyards for a really long time with no damage, but then there could be some sort of shift and they can damage older vines too. It's not as apparent. But a lot of times at that point, you kind of get into like a coexistence and maybe they're providing benefits through like soil aeration and they're not disturbing your operation. And so that's something that can be possible too. You know, they're not always, like I said, there's benefits and they're not always pests. But yeah, so the mounds, so in like gardens and turfs, the mounds can kill seedlings. Gophers will eat most tuberous thing or, you know, anything with a taproot, they're going to be attracted to. So especially like gardens and things can be problematic for gophers. There's different solutions you can use in like garden situations that wouldn't be applicable in like a vineyard situation because the sheer size of a vineyard compared to like a small garden. We went over that. Okay, so voles, they're mouse-like. They're a little bit grayer. Like I said, their burrows are shallow, more open. They're their diameter of that opening is very small. A gopher burrow can look like a vole thing if it caves in, like we were saying. And that the problem with voles, and which is different than all of the other animals, is that they have this population boom and bust. So voles are present, but they're not usually a problem until they're a problem. And then it's really hard to deal with them because there's so many. Has anyone dealt with a vole explosion before? Just a few people. And it's something that like ecologists like don't quite understand what causes like these types of cycling in rodents. It's also a phenomenon in like the Arctic with like lemmings and I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but they just have this exponential growth and then all of a sudden they're just back down. And so with voles, the thing that happens like around here, so it's about every 4 to 6 years, but it's kind of also like regional. So like you could have an outbreak like the North County, like, you know, it's not like county wide or like statewide. It's very isolated. Excuse me. and the reason why they're able to reach such high population numbers is because they have such a short breeding cycle. And so they would have babies, and then those babies would already be breeding and having babies, and then it really builds up really quickly. And then for some reason they crash, and it's not fully understood. But there's things that we can do to manage for voles, and especially in vineyards and orchards, like the most effective thing is habitat management, which is keeping under vine areas clear. But I think I have a slide on that later. But let's see. So the damage that voles cause is girdling. It's typically above vine because they're, like I said, they're more on the surface. And this is a very mature vine that got girdled. This typically happens over winter in the dormant period, and then people don't notice it until their vines are all growing, except for some of them aren't. And they're like, what's going on with this little patch over here, or like these isolated spots? And if they have this level of damage, they'll grow less vigorously or they will die. And then that's usually when and then they're like, oh, what happened? And then they see this, because this is when I got a call about this. This is already, you can already see this isn't fresh. This is already much scarred over. So you can see like how much the vines had grown in. So this is something that happened quite a while ago, but probably earlier in that winter. Gophers and voles, some people say like gophers only girdle below ground and voles only above ground, but there can also be some overlap. So you want other signs too. It's not 100% diagnostic. But yeah, this is something that we're hoping. So gophers and voles is something that in my program, and we're hoping to start learning and launching a little bit more research on how we can have permanent cover in vineyards and also manage for gophers and voles. There's some strategies that I'll share with you, but it's, we want to learn. A lot of people are switching to this no-till permanent cover, and then are popping up with these rodent problems. And so we hope to, maybe next time I'm here, I'll have more info on the research we've done and stuff like that. But for now, I can just share with you the tried and true things that we recommend. Here's a last slide kind of comparing a vole, mouse, shrew, and mole. So voles, they are mouse-like. They have a very short tail, though. So mice have bigger ears, bigger eyes, and a longer tail. And that's the same with like deer mice, like field mice, or even like the house mice that they could be in fields, but also inside. And you probably would never see a vole. If you have something scurrying in your house, it's probably a mouse. It's probably not a vole. But I don't want to say never. I don't know. Shrews and moles, they both don't have like really any eyes at all. Shrews also are insectivores, so they're not damaging plant, or they're not, especially not in vineyard situations. But they have this like really pointy snout, and whereas like moles is like really flat with like a weird nose, and then they have the big hands. So it's really hard to tell when they just are scurrying by really fast. But maybe if you get a picture or you get a good look, you'll be able to tell. And then ground squirrels. So these are going to be like our largest of the three, and they're living during the day in colonies out in the open. And they have like the larger burrows, 4 to 6 inches in, and that burrow is their everything. It's multi-generational. It's huge. It's very deep underground and built out. And so yeah, it's one of the strategies with ground squirrels is don't let them make that in the first place, because they will covet that. That's their everything. They pass it down to all their children. So, yeah. And one thing about California ground squirrels, they can, not always, especially where we live because the climate is so temperate, but they do hibernate in winter. But you can see them because a lot of times it's nice, so they don't. And that their diet shifts throughout the year. So in the spring, they're eating, and this is relevant for like baiting them or things like that. And they feed on green vegetation in the spring. And then in the summer and fall, they switch to seeds and fruit. And so it's also important to understand if you see ground squirrels for the first time in your vineyard and you're like, oh, they're just eating like grass, it's like fine, and they're off to the side. But they do switch to like fruit and also nuts and things in closer to harvest time. So other things that I've seen with ground squirrels being out of control are abandoned farms, because if there are trees or things that are still growing fruit or nuts, those are just falling on the ground, and then that's just like endless abundant resources for them. So that's also another problematic thing that I see with ground squirrels. So they're also a big pest in rangelands because the burrow systems can be so large. They are consuming forage, whether it's significant, I'm not sure, but girdling trunks of trees and vines can happen, but it's not like the main thing that ground squirrels do. I don't know if people that have ground squirrels, what kind of damage are you seeing from them?
They're only a real danger but they'll absolutely desiccate an area, eat all the green tissue that's brand new, and then they'll bunch of
So they did girdle and eat the
They
tissue.
don't girdle, they go up when the buds are first coming out and they're small and tender.
Oh, okay,
And
so
they just eat all that material.
yeah, so then it prevents the fruit from growing and developing. And then they eat the fruit, yeah.
They're pretty destructive, the burrows.
The burrows are really bad too, but yeah.
How deep is their burrow system, and do they go horizontal or do they go at?
They do both. So like gophers are probably like, can be like this, voles are probably like this, gophers are like this, and ground squirrels can be several feet. Several feet, yeah.
The other question I have is for us, it's like a sudden explosion. We never saw squirrels. And all of a sudden, boom, they were just there.
Yeah.
Taking over, right?
Yeah. So, that can happen. I think maybe I'll have a little bit more on that, but that's one of that's good that you notice like right when it happened, because it's just going to continue to grow until they reach that like, they can have a lot of animals in one place. I saw a hand.
Yeah, and then again, I've seen them grow around like an established root system, and then it's just heat and
Yes.
exposure kind of leads to the deterioration of the vine. I also have them stealing eggs from the chicken.
Oh my gosh, they're really tenacious. Yeah, I've definitely heard that, because their burrows are so like large, and they're not really providing soil aeration in the sense of like a gopher might make a tunnel and then later it collapses, whereas they can like air and light and other things can come in and damage that root system. That's definitely a problem. And then was there a hand? They will just mate once, and let's see if I have it. I guess, let's see, gotta go back to this. So I'm not sure if you can see that from here, but I also have a link to this website. It's called Ground Squirrel Best Management Practices. So they're gonna be having a mating season from like late winter, early spring through summer, and a lot of times they'll kind of start that while they're still like inactive or hibernating, and then they'll emerge, and then later on you'll see all the babies emerge. And so for ground squirrels it's just once per year, but it's a long period. Gophers and voles continue to breed year round. They kind of have like a peak season, but I think ground squirrels is more seasonally tied. And then you'll see the babies emerge in like late summer. Often you'll see all these like smaller animals running across the road as you drive by or walk by. But I don't know how many they have. That's a good question. I think I would, because I don't know the answer to that. But either way, seems like they can breed very rapidly. So no matter what, however many they're having, it's still they can grow very quickly, and they can colonize like a new area pretty quickly. Okay, so those. so about their damage, and then about the differences between tree squirrels and ground squirrels, which we talked about. Don't use any of these methods on tree squirrels. So some of our management actions that we could take. So the first three that I'll cover, so habitat modification, cultural practices, and biological control. So habitat modification is like, how can you change that environment or manipulate that environment to make it less suitable? Cultural practices are like things you can do, like farming practices and things like that. Biological control is increasing natural predators or raptors and things that help naturally pick off or scare the rodents. And so all of these species have pretty good, I'm not saying because everything you do, you're never going to have like 100%, you'll never have 100%, but they have pretty good recommendations for things you could try in all of these categories for these species. So for example, for habitat modification, so for example, for gophers, and this is also part of the thing we want to look at with perennial cover, less tilling, and rodent activity in as ground cover in orchards and vineyards, is maybe because they're more attracted to cover crops with tap roots, that if we are using like perennial grasses or things like that, that it's less suitable for gophers. And so we're hoping to measure that in some future research. But they can be attracted to, I know, and there's some specific cover crops that are like, that have tap roots. And a lot of times there's other things that you're managing for, like, oh, these are going to provide extra nitrogen to the soil and things like that. I'm not 100% sure what those are, but maybe it's something that if you do have gopher problems, you wouldn't maybe take a year off of using that because it wouldn't provide as much food for them. For voles, I think that the gold standard for voles is figuring out some way to keep vegetation short and the undervine areas bare. And so in that vole photo, this one, one thing that happened here, so they had permanent cover. They have to have permanent cover because they're on a slope. They went through and they did their mowing, and they had all of these piles of grasses. So even though they mowed and they kept the vegetation short, having those grass piles was also something that the voles were able to utilize, and like they had tunnels through even that. So they're just, think about like cover. Excuse me. Think about cover, and like if you're running across the ground, if you have something you can run through, you're going to be better off as a vole. And that's why a lot of times people say like, oh, like what if we covered it with like plastic or that like ground cover stuff? But voles will get under that too, and that can be really problematic. Okay. And then for ground squirrels, so one thing like in your circumstance where ground squirrels just showed up right away and you were like caught off guard. One thing you can't, I don't know if this was your situation, but in some instances, there will be resources that they can use around as like an initial cover before they start to initialize their burrow system. And so a lot of times there'll be big brush piles on the edges of fields, and if you leave those there, dispersing ground squirrels will find them, and they'll kind of use that as their like temporary burrow, and they'll start getting set up. And so we do recommend to keep those away from fields, and just to pile them up and then take them out or do whatever you're going to do with them. For cultural practices, for voles and gophers, it's thought that some inter-row cultivation can destroy burrows. The depth depends. Like I said, gophers are a little bit lower, but they're it's not going to remove the animals. It could cause the animals to just run to a nearby field, and so that can also be problematic. But we are hoping, like I said, to learn more about how can we have these no-till systems or minimal cultivation and also control rodents. And then for ground squirrels, you can, if you do remove animals through trapping or shooting or however you can use deep ripping to like a couple feet depth to get rid of those burrows, because like I said, if you have that resource there, they can use that to reinvade. And then raptor nest boxes, which I have a lot of slides on, but not a lot of time left, so I'll keep moving past that. The other actions, so exclusion, trapping, shooting, repellents, and burrow fumigation, there's a few things you could use, but there's also mixed tactics and mixed results. So you see some question marks, there's ongoing research in some of these areas, and then some flat out we know, like, probably not going to work, or it's not going to work or not feasible. So for voles, I think a gold standard too is exclusion, because like I said, their populations boom and bust. You never know if you have a vole problem until you have a vole problem. So if you have young vines and you can use the plastic trunk protectors, that's really important. They need to extend several inches below ground, and they're not the same thing as, there's some sort of trunk things that prevent against mowing or mildew. I don't know exactly, but it's the hard plastic ones. And if they're not below ground, voles can go in them and use them as their cover. So then they might so it could cause more problems. So it's something that if you do put up trunk protectors, you do want to monitor that too and make sure that it's not creating a habitat for them, but it can be very effective. If you have a barn or something, or a house on your farm that is getting invaded by rodents, exclusion is the best method for structures. It is tedious and time consuming, and also would require trapping to get them out, but it can be very efficacious. And it's also something you can use for like small scale farming, gardens and things like that. Like if you have like a garden bed, you could put chicken wire on the bottom so gophers aren't coming up through that. Trapping gophers and ground squirrels is going to be the most effective method, and there's different strategies, and I don't really have time to go into specific trapping strategies, but I encourage you to look online and to not get discouraged, because it is a skill you have to learn over time and get good at. There are resources online and some of the links I have. And then ground squirrels, a lot of times when it is legal in specific jurisdictions where you can discharge a firearm, you can do shooting for ground squirrels. There are no repellents on the market. There is some active research regarding drip irrigation lines and repellents, but nothing on the market and nothing that we can say that is like backed by evidence that we would recommend. And then there is chemical control options. I don't have time to go into rodenticides and burrow fumigation methods today. There are various methods for different species, but these are going to be the things, like I said, they're going to be last in your toolkit, because there are non-target implications, and also it's not an option for organic as well. So there's more restrictions. And do you have a question?
Yeah, just there is bait that is certified organic.
Okay, but maybe
it's harder to get.
And maybe not for all the species as well. Depends.
Yeah, I mean for, let's say, gophers.
Right. Yeah.
Are you talking those pheromones that you can spray?
No, I'm talking bait. It looks just like the chunk.
Yeah, pheromone would probably be more of like a repellent, I think, in the category.
Well, there is one that we heard about last year, a pheromone for gophers.
Nice.
Spray. Yeah,
I haven't seen any like research studies like showing that. So there might be private trials by companies that show that, but I'm not aware of any of those. But there are things that are like new and exciting, and this is always changing. So it's something that maybe it's not available now, or we don't know, but maybe it does work, and and we'll have more information on that. Okay, I'm gonna skip this. Here's some resources. You see IPM, Vertibrate Pest Control Handbook, Ground Squirrel Best Management Practices, and you can Google like YouTubes of like gopher trapping and things like that. That would be really helpful. Okay, so I have definitely talked over pretty far into my time, but I do want to go over the raptor management slides, just because this is an area that I like to focus on, especially in my research, and is a lot of people have really good results with this. But what I do like to emphasize with biological control and attracting raptors and predators is that it's not an immediate solution. It's a long-term ecological management strategy that you can employ on a farm. Farms have lots of great habitat and lots of food for raptors. So especially here, you readily get, you can have pretty good numbers and presence of these predators. And you can do a few things to maybe boost that or boost breeding raptors so they'll stick around all spring and summer. But if you're like, oh, I have a field here, I have too many gophers, I'm going to put up an owl box. You have to think about that owl box as your tool, your long-term strategy. But if you're already past a threshold, you're going to need to use something like trapping or exclusion or habitat modification. You're going to have to continue to address that in different ways. So putting this up, it is shown it can help, but it's not going to be like, oh, next year I'm not going to have any gophers. So it's important to think about it as just a single tool, and also it takes time because it takes time for them to find these things and show up and build up their populations as well. But there's lots of benefits to this because you are providing habitat and space for native predators, which is really awesome for many reasons. People can use it in marketing, and also just having animals, wildlife around as you're farming is really great. So the three main things that I recommend to boost especially breeding raptors are nest boxes, raptor perches, and then also protecting and restoring or preserving habitat in and around farms. And so I just talked about this. And so our biggest poster child for this are barn owls. There's the most research behind them, and they're also the most common species. They can nest in really close densities to each other, and they eat more. Their eyes are bigger than their stomachs. So like here is a nest, and you can see a gopher, you can see a couple wolves, but there's also like 6 or 7 mice in here as well. And that's just one night of hunting for one male, and he's providing that to his to the mom and to the nestlings. And they eat 3,000 to 4,000 rodents per family, and they can have multiple nests. And there is research that shows that it does, it's not going to limit, a predator will never eliminate all pests, but it does help reduce that pressure if you can build up an owl population on your farm. Yes?
You mentioned density. How many owl boxes can you put up per unit area? Yeah,
how many owl boxes per area? So there's no set answer. So this is my answer to that is you got to create a network. So you got to start with what you can, maybe 2 boxes, and then think about, do my neighbors have boxes? Do they have owls? Maybe extend that network because their owls will have babies and then they'll come over to your boxes. But so it depends on how many owls you have nesting. You don't want to go all out 25 boxes and then be like, oh, actually, this isn't even really great owl habitat. So they do have a specific, they like specific areas. Vineyards in general, they like because they're pretty open. They do not like conifer forests or woodland, like really heavily wooded areas. So vineyards surrounded by grasslands or oak savanna areas, or even marshy areas are going to have the most presence of barn owls and be able to build that up. But yeah, I always recommend to just site specific, put up a couple, monitor them. If they get used, put up more.
So when you say put up a couple on a 20-acre vineyard or a 3-acre?
Well, I would say, what are your resources? You could definitely start with 2 on 3 acres. Okay. On 20 acres, you could start with more if you think it's a great spot for barn owls. Yeah, and so this is an example of some of my grad research where we put little trackers on the owls. So this is a farm. This is it's really big. This is 2 miles across. This is a vineyard in the Dunnigan Hills in Yolo County, and we had they had 50 boxes. They had a lot of owls, almost all the boxes were occupied. And because there's no trees around, so they didn't have alternative choices. And we put trackers on the owls, and you can see like your owls are your neighbor's owls, and your neighbor's owls are your owls, and it's not like it's great to like build that up like within your community. And Sonoma County does. I want to highlight one resource. Sorry, I'm skipping around. Is the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue Barn Owl Maintenance Program, so they can provide consultations. I think last time Doris was at Grape Day, right? Or I don't know if she's going to be there this year. In the past, maybe you've seen her at Grape Day. But they sell barn owl boxes. They can give you information on where to put them, and they can also, if you want to subscribe to their like cleaning and maintenance. So since we're on this slide, I will highlight the importance of, if you are putting up barn owl boxes, it's important to monitor and maintain them. They're just these wooden structures out in the sun, so they're going to get dilapidated over time. The owls are still going to try to use them, and we've seen owls trapped in boxes that have blown off their pole, and we've seen owls nesting in boxes where the bottom is like half out, or the side flap isn't secure, and so it's like the top could fly off. And so checking all of that every year and making sure all the latches are closed tight. If the latch doesn't work, just put a screw in it so that it's closed. And then as they're in the box, they are regurgitating and defecating, and that stuff just builds up and up and up. And so if you have a larger box, it's something that if you have an active nest, you will eventually need to clean it out. Not every year, but you can maybe do every other year. But you need to be kind of like aware of what's going on. This is a kestrel box, so they're a little bit smaller. But this was not checked for 15 years. And this was up to the opening, all of this, and you can tell it's just kind of like degraded and composted. But then there were 5 nestlings in there, and they were all standing almost like above the hole, and they were crammed, and so like that creates additional problems. And also, if you're going to spend the time to put these up, why would you want to reduce your chances of them being successful? So it does take time to pay attention to them and effort as well. So it's something to consider. Yes.
Since you're on the subject, I have 4 owl boxes. I'm 15 acres, by the way, if that's of any interest. But I had a great population of barn owls, and then I started hearing more and more horned owls.
Great horned owls and barn owls. It's like it's something, so that's a really interesting observation. I get this question a lot about, and I had this question earlier too, about great horned owls and barn owls. So great horned owls are really big bullies, and they will, they're very territorial, whereas barn owls are not, and that's why they get into these really high densities, and they're really great in these situations. But great horned owls are they're not using the nest boxes. They're using old raptor nests or raven nests in trees. And so, yeah, they can come in and they can kind of take over an area for a few years, and then those nests will fly out or fall out, and then they'll leave. So it's really kind of like an ebb and a flow. And so, but great horned owls are also eating a lot of pests. They're probably eating a lot more rats and even rabbits and things as well. So,
larger
yeah.
prey, including cats.
Including cats.
Right, but that little barn owl population was just awesome. We could go out at night and they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
It was so great, and now I'm seeing I'm going to have to start trapping. So I'm here to see what you can.
Yeah, but it's something that's just like a natural ebb and flow, and there's not really anything you can do. Yeah.
Owls do attack barn owls.
Great horned owls are predator barn owls.
I went out one
Yes.
day, and at the bottom of one of the nests was
A
2
ripped up
wings
owl.
and no body.
Yeah, and the most vulnerable time for that is when the nestlings are fledging. That's when they're just starting to emerge from the nest. They will go up on top of the nest box or in nearby habitat, and they don't really know what's going on, and that's when they're very vulnerable. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer. We want more barn owls and less great horned owls. Noted. Yeah.
What was I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. What was the now, like midsummer?
Yeah, so I have a few notes on that as well. Let's balance that. So for barn owl nest boxes, barn owls have an incredibly long breeding season. They're actually originated from tropical latitudes and like evolved and moved up over the time. And so they aren't as tied to like spring breeding as like a lot of our other birds are. And they start early. They start getting and picking their nests even in December sometimes, January. Then they start laying their eggs in, they can really lay eggs at any time of year, but like the peak time is like January, February, and then they start hatching around March. And so if you kind of back that up to like, when should I clean out? They're already kind of picking that box in January, sometimes December. And so we recommend fall, which is problematic for grape growers because fall is a very busy time. So I just recommend that after harvest and everything is done, the next thing you do is clean your boxes. If you do visit them in winter, just to like check on them, if you see owls and disturb them, it could be fine, but it's also like they're trying to evaluate, like, will I be safe here for the next 3 or 4 months? And so disturbance at that time that's their most sensitive period. So you don't want to discourage them by visiting and disturbing the boxes during that time. But so February, March, and then the babies after they hatch, they take 2 months till they start venturing outside of the box. So that's like April, May, June. You'll see a lot of, if you do have barn owls and you go out in the evening, that's when they'll be out, leaving, learning how to fly. It's really cute. At dusk, you can hear them start to beg and stuff. And at that time, sorry, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so then at that time, some birds will start another nest. And so it can just keep going. And in moderate years, they'll just keep going all year. But like there is kind of like a peak in that, what I just described. So it's always good to just like check inside of a nest. If there's like a top, you can like plug the hole and you can like look inside, kind of like this picture, like peek in. Or if there's like a side, you can kind of lift up and just check. Or if you hear like shuffling, and then if you hear that, just go to the next box and just kind of leave that one alone. But then you can write it down like, oh, I didn't visit this box this year. I really need to make sure I check on it. And then if you are kind of like in tune with the owls and you see them fledge, you can just visit it right after that. They do start venturing out of the box and they keep going back into the box, probably for like another week after that, after you start a week or 2. So they're kind of like gaining independence, but they're not fully independent yet. Okay, so we're at 12 o'clock, but I just want to quickly show there are other species that we can make nest boxes for. So particularly western screech owls and American kestrels. They also eat a lot of pests. There's just less research on it. They're going to have a smaller box. It's going to be a 3-inch opening, and that prevents barn owls from getting in there. Screech owls are going to be great places for boxes for screech owls. So if you do live like in a vineyard with like a forest around it, you can put these screech owl boxes like in the trees around the edge, and that is going to attract these. Kestrels, we've noticed that they like their boxes out in the open, so more like kind of on a pole out away from the edge. And they're very aerial. They're incredible flyers if you ever see them. And so we think that they just like to have like a clear path to their nest. And so
How high do they like their boxes?
How high? Really, as high as you can put it. But I've seen people put them 15 feet high, and then it's like 20 feet high. You can never reach it. And then it'll end up like that other box if it's used. And I've seen that happen. And I tell them, you can keep that pole, but like once you get up there, get that box and just move it down on the pole, and the pole will serve as like a perch. But in areas that there's less traffic, less people, less stuff going on, like way out in the middle of nowhere, they can be 8 feet high, 7 feet high. They don't need to be crazy. But in areas where it's maybe it's next to like a driveway, or it's just a small vineyard with a house on the side, you putting it higher, they'll feel safer and it might help. So it's whatever you can manage. Yes.
What's the latest research on orientation of the hull?
The orientation, yes. So I'm sorry, I promise I'm giving you all the information and I'm going out of order, but I think that you'll get all the slides after. You guys can read through and let me know if you have more questions. But orientation is really important here because we get hot in the summer. So if you orient your boxes to the east or north or northeast even, you can prevent that hot summer sun from coming in and heating up the box. If you do have smaller boxes without ventilation, like temperature can be a really big factor in the summer for nestling survival. So especially in like hotter counties, we do actually even recommend these sunshade panels. And so if you do face that box east, then you have this panel protecting that from the sun all day for the most part. But in other areas where it's cold, and I know that can be some areas of this county, if you get a strong prevailing wind, you want to just, and I don't know like all the directions of the wind, I wish I did, but for example, in like Monterey, they have to face it away from that prevailing wind because cold is a bigger factor. So again, site specific, but I think heat is probably the biggest detriment here. So I still recommend for the most part. But there's been studies looking at like, they'll use them facing any direction, but whether or not they're gonna have the best outcomes, we don't know. Okay, let's see. Last thing, raptor perches, they can be made out of anything, but we do wanna have a wooden crossbeam, and we do recommend about 15 feet high. Nothing has to be exact with perches because they're just gonna land on it. And if it falls over, they're not gonna get hurt like it would be if they were in a nest box that fell over. So you can really do trial and error and use things you have around or like cheap materials you can find. Like this is like a scrap wine barrel that was cut into these, the perch part. And you wanna place those in at the top of a hill or away from trees and other natural perches. They can work really well in fields, but you have to think about overhead. If you have machinery going over vine, that would be in the way. So you have to consider that. But you can put them around the edge of fields as well. And just here's some examples. You want them to be taller than your crop. So if it is an orchard crop, you don't need a perch right in the middle unless it's like an olive orchard that's very short, and then that could be beneficial. Yeah, so that's all I have. Sorry, I did go over, but I can retake more questions.
One more, and if you don't mind sticking around while we break down the room.
Okay, one more question.
Has anyone had an influx of badgers managing their gophers this year?
Oh, badgers. And also weasels.
Well, tell me about what I need to look for. What's the downside to having this? I have so many badger holes, it's incredible.
I think the only downside to a badgers is if the holes that they create are going to be in the way of to cause your roads to collapse. That's
And endanger the dogs. You gotta train your dogs.
And
to
dogs.
stay away from the badger, but
they're fierce.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
But they're awesome.
Has anyone seen a badger on their property? I have not seen them. I have all these holes.
You got to get game cameras. You got to get some like the hunting cameras.
Aren't the badgers nocturnal?
They're nocturnal, yeah.
So you gotta stay up at night.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, and I'll stay around for questions. Yeah, I'll make a PDF and send it to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, it did go longer than I thought.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure people sign up for this.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that was awesome, right?
That was the best thing. By the way, you know how nature takes care of problems?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could give me an answer about those darn horned owls, but I know they're feeding too,
But it's interesting that, like, you had that. I was just telling someone, he's like, oh, I have great horned owls and no barn owls. And I was like, well, eventually those great horned owls are going to leave and you'll have barn owls. And you saw the other side of this.
Yeah.
The barn owls. But great horned owls can really go anywhere. So, like, in this farm here that I was showing, this farm, this is like Let me make this big again. This is this is huge, right? This
You
is
said it's
2
2
miles.
acres, 2
No,
miles
2 miles.
there,
Yeah. There's no trees, but there was one over here. There was one horse barn and a palm tree, and there was great horned owls, and they flew over this whole area. Yeah, so it's like you can't. People say, "Oh, should I not put up a box because there's a great horned owl?" And I say it does put the owls at risk, but like they have to coexist somehow. It's a great horned owl. There's a barn owl sneak in.
I have to find out where you live.
Kind of a naive question.
There's no naive.
About the owls and the gophers in particular.
Yeah.
So if the gophers mainly are, I mean, they stay underground almost always, don't they?
Yeah,
So
this
then
is
how?
common.
So then how do the owls get them?
So
I'm sorry.
a lot of times I've done a lot of owl pellet dissections, and the gophers are underground, they're breeding, and then they kick out their young.
Oh, okay.
And then it can also happen during, like, if you till and you disturb the ground and the gophers have to flee, they're also vulnerable at that point. But they can get picked off just popping their head out because they're day and night, just like bulls. So they can get picked off like that. But for owls, they're probably doing the best job at dispersing young gophers.
At getting what?
Dispersing young gophers.
Oh, okay.
When they're, or like fleeing gophers.
Okay. So I don't know that we've ever had owls. We have an owl box.
Yeah.
But I just hear it so often that that the owl box is good for gophers, but I've never really